So welcome to Pony Club Victoria's first webinar, Dressage Schooling, Coaching and Performance for Grades 4, 5, 6. We will get underway in a moment. I'm going to begin with a little bit of an introduction, but first of all, a little bit of information about our dressage tests. So Pony Club Victoria has recently released 2 championship level grade 6 dressage tests. These tests are available on the Pony Club Victoria website and are available for use immediately and will become effective for all in January 2021. The advanced level was released earlier this year. And when we did have competitions, they were used, and there are new tests released shortly for grades 1 through to 5, and these will come into effect from 1st of January 2021 and optional for the rest of this year. So keep an eye out on social media and your emails. As soon as they're released, we will let you know, and you guys can start practicing them at home and prepare for next year's competition season, which we'll all be really looking forward to after the hiatus this year. We are delighted to have Mary Longden providing her expertise with all of us tonight. For many, Mary will need no introduction, but for those unaware of Mary's background, she has previously been a judge at Olympic and World Championship level in para-equestrian activities. She's a former Grand Prix dressage judge and a 3-day event I-level judge. She's also judged at the Pony Club Victoria State Dressage Championships. Mary has a master's in special education, and her interest lies in coaching able-bodied and people with disability and coach education. She has a real interest in grassroots coaching and ensuring that people are able to ride to the best of their ability. Mary has been lucky to have the opportunity to travel all over the world to do this. As mentioned before, we will be taking questions in the chat, and at the end of the webinar, we will attempt to answer all of those for you. So sit back and enjoy this presentation from Mary. Over to you, Mary.
Okay, thank you very much for your introduction, and thank you very much for having me. It's very exciting. I think I have to thank Sally Francis for that.
Yes.
Suggested that Sally and I work together a lot, and I told her today that she should be doing this. She would do it very well. Okay, so the next slide, please. Next one. Ah, yes, here. Now this is Isabel, and this is actually at Turadon in a grade 6 combined training, and this is what it's all about. This is what grade 6 is. You've just got to have enough balance to be able to stay on, to have fun. And fun is such an important thing, and look at it, it's just wonderful. And then we come on to the next one, which is a slightly more serious aria on a really lovely looking little pony. Probably got a little bit of age on it, but also ideal for giving the riders confidence. So both these ponies are really look terrific. Thank you. So this session is going to cover some of the common terminology used in dressage, which for those of us that live dressage, we don't think anything of it. But I remember years ago in England, we were being taught in the Pony Club by this lady who'd won she was the first female to ever win a 3-day event. Viv Boone, she was called. And she must have hated teaching us, but she said to our little group, "Come along, we're going to do dressage in a menage." And we had no idea. We'd never heard of either of those terms. And we thought we were going to go cross country. And then we arrived and went, "Oh, we're going to be schooling. How awful." So terminology is just so important. Trying to make learning dressage fun is important. When I teach boys and we're going to do dressage and we're going to do jumping, I don't actually call it dressage. I call it schooling for jumping. So that doesn't put them off at the beginning, and then we just do all the things you have to be able to do, which is dressage if you're going to jump well. I believe very strongly that corners are the framework of riding a test. And we're also going to have a look at the movements in the grade 4, 5, and 6 tests. Then for those of you who are coaches, being able to teach in a class situation where people aren't bored and they're learning and doing stuff is also important. How to learn a dressage test, because I gather that the lower levels can be called, but not at a championship level, so not at a state level. So there's quite an art in actually how you learn a dressage test. Then preparing for competition and the warm-up and what you do if you don't tell your riders that it's okay if they go wrong. When they go wrong, they burst into tears and gallop out of the arena. So that's one of the things we have to teach them. Thank you. So we're just starting, for those of you that don't know, the distances between the markers. Because H, F, K, and M are called quarter markers, people presume that they're going to be 10 meters from the corner. And of course they're not, they're only 6. So that has a big bearing in how you actually ride circles and things. Okay. Right, now this is an interesting thing, which is, do you teach it correctly right from the beginning and then make it harder, or do you teach it incorrectly first and then improve it? And it's quite an interesting thing with coaching and with how you want to do things. What will you do as a coach? Well, I think it's better to teach it correctly from the beginning rather than say, okay, ride a circle, and then you say, no, you didn't go there, it should be somewhere else. And as a rider, which would you prefer? So I believe that you do things very simply and then you gradually make the difficulty factor bigger, and then you end up with the result you want. Next one. So that's just something for coaches to think about. So error-free learning is, because learning can be so difficult for so many people, you only want to have to teach something once. So you want to plan what you're going to teach, and you've got to work out, is it relevant for the person at the time? Because if it's not, if you had a group of grade 4 riders and you decided you were going to do leg yielding, that's not really very relevant. Even though they might like to do it, it's not into the scheme of what you should be teaching them. And just check that you have your facts right. I'm sure all of you that have been coaching for many years will come up with, but it's correct to be on this trotting diagonal, and you go, actually, no, it's not. Oh, well, I was taught that by my coach. So if you're just learning to coach, just make sure that you have your facts correct. We're far too wordy when we teach, so you want to explain things in as short a time as possible and also with as few words as possible. Now, you will have all kinds of learners. So you have the visual learners that like to see it. You have the auditory learners, and there are not nearly so many of those. But when we teach riding, we tend to teach people by telling them what to do rather than showing them what to do. And the tactile learners actually like to do it. So they actually, maybe it's important that you have all your markers out so that when they do it, because they haven't really watched and they haven't really listened, that they can still do it correctly. So when you demonstrate something, you need to let the riders do it straight away. And I have found, and it doesn't matter what level riders I'm coaching, they don't really listen to it very much. But so then you let them do it, and then they don't do it correctly. And then they say, what were the aids again? So then right, now you have their attention. So now the learning's actually going to happen. And then they can try and do it. It's interesting with the number of times that you do something, because if you don't do it enough times, then the learning hasn't taken place. And the next time when you come to do it, you'll be surprised that none of them do it correctly. If you do it too many times, then they get bored. So the number of times that people do something like ride a circle or do a halt on the center line, you just have to be looking and you have to measure the reaction that you're getting from the riders. Okay, next one. Fun. So I actually looked up fun, someone or something that provides amusement or enjoyment. I just feel that fun is it's fun if you've achieved something that was slightly difficult, but not so difficult that you failed. So if it's too easy, it's just boring. And if it's too difficult, then everybody switches off. Failure can be a motivator, but it basically isn't very often a motivator. So just be careful when people fail. I'm not sexist, but when you teach boys, you want to say two good things, then you can say one thing that wasn't quite so good. When you teach girls, you can usually do one good, one bad, one good. So it's interesting because the boys seem to switch off much quicker than the girls do. How will your riders give you feedback on their effort? So you can see it by by their attitude, by whether they're smiling, laughing, you just have to look as well as ask them. You've got to be careful when you ask, because if you have a group of 6 riders and you ask them an open question like, what did you think? Then you have to stay there while everybody gives what they thought. So you're better off doing a closed question. Would you like to do that again next week? Gives you a pretty good answer about whether they liked it or not. How will you give your riders feedback in a constructive manner? It's just like when you're judging dressage, you say circle should be round rather than circle wasn't round. So you have to try and do it in a constructive manner. So if you did this, then you'd get a better mark. So if you looked where you were going through the corner, then you'd get a better mark or whatever. So the coach requires knowledge, patience, and enthusiasm for teaching every rider in the class. Everybody doesn't need to like everybody, but you have to try and give them equal time. And you can actually, if you pass your enthusiasm on, then you can really get good results with your riders. Okay. So now the terminology. Speed, tempo, and rhythm is just things that people just can't seem to grasp. So with the speed and tempo, I talk about, so speed is how fast you go from A to B, and tempo is how fast the horse's legs move. So I use the example of if you have an 18-hand horse and a Shetland pony trotting down the road together, they're both going at the same speed, but the pony's tempo is much faster than the horse's. Now, that's the way that I give an example, and I think people seem to find that a little bit easier to understand, whereas rhythm is more with the music, which is the evenness of the steps. Then activity you have in the walk. You don't have impulsion and suspension in walk because there's always at least one leg on the ground. So impulsion is activity which originates in the hindquarters, and suspension is how long the horse spends in the air when all 4 legs are off the ground. So I don't think you necessarily have to teach that at grade 6, 5, and 4, but if the rider asks you a question, then you definitely need to be giving them the right answer. And then straightness can be confusing because you've got straightness on a straight line and you've got straightness on a curve. So then you talk about if the horse is straight, the hind legs are following the tracks of the front legs. And then you can demonstrate that. Then long sides, short sides, and center line, we tend to not teach that. And then we just are expecting a rider that's just starting off to actually know what we're talking about. And then you've got on the track and an inside track where they're a couple of meters in, and then the quarter and 3/4 lines, halfway between the center line and the long sides. So if you're suddenly saying to someone, go on the 3/4 line, they just wouldn't have the vaguest idea what you're talking about. Falling in and falling out, when we use those terms, if you were talking to someone who had autism, they'd be thinking they were going to fall off to the inside or the outside of the horse. And which is the inside and which is the outside, because you're in a house or out of a house, or in a car or out of a car. So these expressions that we just use all the time, we do actually have to explain them a little bit more. And then there's flexion, which comes from the pole, the North Pole, the South Pole. You have to actually tell them if you want to talk about pole, then you actually have to know that they know where the pole is. And I'm sure they probably don't necessarily know when they're grade 6. So the main thing is that bend is through the body and flexion comes from the pole, from where the head joins onto the neck. This will be covered more in the more advanced levels later. Okay, but not tonight. Now, there are so many misunderstandings. If you say to your rider, are your hands level? And you've probably said that to them because their hands aren't level. There are two ways of meaning this. Is one hand higher than the other, or is one hand in front of the other? And they can get frantic because you can say to them, no, more, no, that's not right, no, your hands still aren't level. All you have to do is show them. So you show them your hands together, your hands are like that, they need to be level, or your hands are like that, they have to be level. So you actually have to explain it to them. Another big misunderstanding is when you read a dressage test and it says AF trot, then a lot of riders think that means between A and F trot, but it doesn't. And they used to write the dressage test differently. So they would say A trot, and then somewhere later they'd say the next marker. So any of you parents who are going over the tests with your children, unless it says between, you have to do it at the first marker. Now, another thing that's really confusing is you say to your rider, do a bigger corner. Well, does that mean go tighter or shallower? So you just have to explain it. You have to say, do a bigger corner, make it easier for the horse. Don't go quite so close. And then, but I just find that teaching, you can be teaching somebody and you think they understand what you've said, and actually they don't understand. Well, they've interpreted, they've just interpreted it differently. Okay. So keep it simple. I think and I know there are some RDA coaches here, when you make something simple, then it's so easy for everybody. We make things so complicated that you can't do it. So one of the things is looking. So when you say to somebody, look where you're going, that has no meaning. You have to say where to look and when to look. And then it is simple. But just looking, people can be looking anywhere. And then when you go over the aids, you need to say what every aid does. So if you've got a class of riders and you've stopped them because you want to talk to them, and you really do need to stop them, because when the horse is moving, half of what you say isn't even going to get into the brain because you've got all the movement and everything else happening. So you really need to stop them. And I never line them up in a straight line. I always line them up in a semicircle, Because when you have a straight line and you're in the middle, the people on the end, you've lost them before you ever start. Whereas if you have them on a semicircle, and you're in the middle, you're equidistant from all the riders, which means that nobody feels left out. And then I will say, well, if you're doing a turn, what do you think your inside leg does? And so you actually go over each aid. So saying to a rider, inside leg on the girth, outside leg behind the girth, doesn't actually tell them what the aids do. So I try and do that a little bit more carefully. Now, so 2 legs say go, 1 leg says move away, and then the inside hand asks for the turn or looking, outside hand controls. And I was interested to see in the directives for level 4, it says that if the rider is holding the horse to the outside track with the outside rein, and as a result the horse is looking out, that doesn't matter. That is a better fault than the horse coming in off the track. So it's quite interesting actually seeing the guidelines for each level. And then 2 hands are always going to say whoa, even if in the higher levels it's more outside hand. And then the rider's shoulders just face the direction of travel. Okay. Now, corners are the framework of riding a dressage test. They're also the framework of a show jumping round, which means that when you're teaching boys and you're doing the corners, then you equate it to actually coming into a fence. So is straight. Okay. So we've got somebody's online.
Should go to jail.
Somebody has to, is everybody on mute? Okay,
Yes.
gone.
Okay.
Okay, right, so this is how I teach. It doesn't matter if somebody has a disability or not a disability, it doesn't matter what age they are, and it really doesn't matter if it's a young horse. The first thing I teach is the corners, because if you don't teach corners first, then you find that the riders never get to the short side at all. So they ride, we've got some funny sound on this, never mind. Riding round the arena on the track. So you've got them separated, you've got them one following the other. You have to decide what size corners you're going to ride. So at this level, you're probably going to ride 1/4 of a 10-meter circle in walk, and then in trot, 1/4 of a 12-meter circle, which means that it begins and ends on like M and H. I also do transitions right from the beginning. If you look at any of the rules, it says that the transition has to take place as the rider's body passes the marker. Well, if you do that, you will always be late. So the only time when you do that is when you have to do a halt at a marker, and that's when the rider's body is actually at the marker. So basically what one teaches is as the horse's head passes the marker, you should be in the new pace, and then this looks perfect. So that's, so sometimes the rules don't actually tell you how to teach or ride. Okay. Next one. So here is just somebody that's, who we've got Billy, and she's looking at her corner, and you can see that she's going to ride a really good corner. She's really set herself up very well for that. Next one. And here we have Adelaide, who's just finished. She may be about to do free walk on a long rein on the diagonal, I think, because her horse's head is coming a little bit low, but she's obviously come around the corner having shown some bend. So that is very good. Good zoomer. Okay, now, with this error-free learning, all of you who coach should have a collection of cones that you can take with you that aren't too heavy, that you just put down and pick up. There's a message. Have you got that, Kathleen? So you tell the riders where to look and when to look, and you do it on your feet. So you demonstrate when you're going to use the aids, and then you can plan the turn. Getting the riders to walk it on foot is often a good idea. So if you knew that they were going to ride after lunch, you might say, well, just before you, let's just do 5 minutes actually walking it on foot first. And then they can ride it, and they're looking, or just go on to the next one because that shows exactly how you do it. So, okay, so here's the corner. So the corner that comes onto and off the diagonal has 3 parts. So if you're coming on the right rein, you do a quarter of a circle first, then you are straight, and then you turn onto the, here you're turning onto the diagonal line. And then the other way, you've come on the diagonal, and as the horse's head passes M, the horse should be on the long side. That's, if that doesn't happen, there's no chance of the horse having any kind of a bend through the corner. So walking it with the riders allows them to get the idea of a quarter of a circle, then straight, then turn. And it comes in more advanced levels, but you bend on the corner. When you come onto the diagonal, you don't bend your horse to the inside, you only flex them to the inside, because if you bend them, then you come onto the diagonal line actually crooked. And as the tests go on, you have to do showing length and strides and then medium trot. So you actually want the horse's hind legs behind them, not to the inside. Okay, next one, please. Yeah, so you show them, we'll just go on to the next one because that shows, okay, so here you are as a coach, you're standing on the quarter marker at M, and your riders are circling at F. They then come one at a time, and it actually happens quite quickly because as one gets up to you, the next one is starting. And you can see the cones because you want the riders to get it correct. Now, it's as they come on the diagonal line that they have to tell you whether the horse's head is, or its face is actually facing you. So you're standing at M, and this is the way I actually teach straightness. For years, I've taught it on a circle, but I'm finding that this is a much better way of doing it because you don't have to do a lot of, is he falling out, is he falling in, which legs are you going to use? As the rider comes on the diagonal and they see that the horse's head is not facing you, they will do the correct aids to get the horse straight. So I'm finding this has much better results. So then they've all come across, and then they pass C, and then they're going to circle to H. So we need the next slide, please. And you run down. Well, you're not going to run if you're going to scare the horses, but you hasten down to F, and then the riders. But here you don't have so many cones because you're hoping that the riders have learned something from the first one. So they're just circling there and then they come across. And it's a really nice, the other option is for you, instead of going down the long side, is you just go past C and you come to H, and you can do it from there. Or you can have the riders go all the way down the long side and then they come towards you from F to H. And it's a good exercise to teach a class lesson. Obviously it's easier if you've only got a couple of riders, but it's very possible to do it with a big class. Okay. And here, Scarlett clearly has her horse straight. And that's the feeling, and that's the sort of outline that we'd like to have. We don't want the horses coming behind the vertical and over bending. We want the horses to be freely forward, and you can see that the horse has got nice movement with his shoulders. He's not being restricted, and you can clearly see that he's straight. Okay. Now, these are when you're teaching, so you want the end result to be that the horses come on the diagonal, they have a good bend to start with and at the end. But if you ask everything at once, then you tend not to achieve anything. So I think it's better if the first time you're saying to the riders, does your horse look to the inside on the K corner? So that's the first corner they come to. And you could just ask that one question. And then you can have the riders coming quite close behind each other, so long as you've placed yourself so you can see them. And then the next thing could be, is the horse's head straight? Does it stay straight before X and after X? Then you can work on, you have to decide with the little kids, are you going to talk about speed or are you going to talk about tempo? And really it's all about speed, I think, at this level. And then do they look to the inside at M? And then do it in walk first and then do it in trot. Now, if you have a rider that's above everybody else, and that often happens, you then ask them for a harder option, which would be that they have to walk over X for 5 steps, counting with the front feet and then going into trot. Or you could get all of them doing it, but it's the corners and is the horse's head straight that's really important, first of all. Okay. Now, in all the tests, right the way through, we have this B turn right, E turn left. And the difficulty is, where do they start their turn? Now, I just want to go to the next 2 slides, but then come back to this one. So this is very commonly seen. They turn way too early, they vaguely get over X, and then they turn way too early again. And the other one is where they start the turn when they get to B. Well, it says B, turn right. So they then never get onto the BE line, and then they're barely on the long side before the corner comes. So now if we can just go back to the correct one. Okay, so here you could put a marker on the long side. So they're going to ride a quarter of a 10-meter circle if they can. And in one of the grade 6 tests, it's done in walk, where they turn left at E and right at B. So it's, if you put a marker on the long side where they're going to start, and then you put where they're going to finish. And for those that are mathematically minded, now some people love maths and some people hate it. So in your lesson, you're going to have some people that want to know exactly where they're going and others that really don't like that at all. So for those that like it, you arrive on the BE line 5 meters from B, you are then straight for 10 meters, and then the last 5 meters is spent turning to the left. So what you're teaching them is they get the first turn, and then they've got to get the looking left before they get to E. So this is where the outside rein, so they come round the corner, then they take the new outside rein, then they get the new looking to the inside, because when they get to the 3/4 line where they're going to start their turn, they already have to be looking to the new inside. So in the approach, when they come past M, they've got to be already trying to get the horse looking to the inside so they can get the turn. And it's an easy thing to teach in a class situation, because if they're coming from B, you stand behind E, and then when all the class have turned left, then they all come back and they turn left at B and right at E, and if necessary, they do a circle at one end. And it's really important to teach this correctly from the beginning. Okay, so now we can go on past the bad ones. And then we come on to the entry, halt, and salute. So what we have to teach riders that are going to ride a dressage test is, how do they actually enter the arena? Well, if they are coming in on the right rein, they go around the A marker, then they're going to be crooked coming in. So they've actually got to keep the marker on their outside as they come in, or the letter. And then they come in to the middle of the entry gap. I can be judging at all different levels, and probably about 1/3 of riders in any level will not come in the middle of the entry. So that's one of the things that you need to teach. If you teach it right from the beginning, then they'll never do it wrong. So you're also saying where to look. They tend to, when they look to find where X is, they look to the left and then they look to the right, as if X is going to change depending on which way they look. But the problem is, when they look to the left, the horse goes to the left, then they look to the right, then the horse goes to the right. So you have to teach them, can they glance to one side without actually turning their head? And then riders tend to, if they're right-eyed, will want to look to B, and if they're left-eyed, they want to look to E. So you can do a nice little lesson of them coming up the center line saying, which way do you like to look? Now, some people teach that if at C you're going to turn right, that you need to come in on the right rein, but I don't believe that's actually true. I think you need to come in actually on your horse's stiffer side, so that when they go down the center line, they don't drift to one side. But that comes into a later talk. Then in the early tests, they don't have to halt at the beginning, but they do have to halt at the end. So how long does it take them to get their horse to get from trot or from walk, whichever they're in, into halt? And this is something that you can practice with them. At this stage, the qualities of the halt that you're looking for is, number one, is it still? And number two, is it straight? So those are the two important things at this level that you need to be teaching. There are still, straight, is it square, is it round? Those are always going to be the 4 priorities, and then you've got the other ones of, does the pole stay the same height and stuff. But you don't want to be muddling people. You want to be, is the halt still, and is it straight facing C? And then how to salute, because if you don't teach them how to salute, they're going to come down the center line and they're going to salute as if they're in the army. So, and lots of kids do that because they've never watched anybody salute and nobody's ever taught them how to do it. So it's just the head down. Now, if a horse is going to stand perfectly still, then if the rider's upper body moves slightly forward, then it doesn't matter. But if your horse is likely to move at the halt, as soon as your shoulders go forward, the horse is going to move off, because that's what you've actually told them to do. So show them how to salute. You put your hand, it's nice, it looks really nice if you do hand down first, and then you nod your head, then you put your head up, then you get the rein back, and then you move off. And then we go on to the move off at the, and the turn at sea. So if we could have the next one. Ah, good. So the one, the bottom, the blue one is the correct one. You're teaching your rider where to look. The one on the top one, that has been ridden by going to 5 meters from sea. So sea to the corner is 10 meters. So you don't actually go to 5 meters because you've got to get on the track and off the track. So the blue one at the bottom shows that you actually, you want to put your marker, but you have to tell the riders that half the stride is before the marker. This is at sea, the one at sea, and half of it is after the marker. Because doing the top one, which is what people think they have to do, they look at halfway, they go there, and then they're way too tight into the corner and they get into all kinds of trouble. So then horses tend to, if we can just go on to the next one, and you see this all the way up the levels. When the rider goes, I'm about to go left, because they pull back with the inside hand, the horse drifts to the right. So you see this, any of you that judge at the higher levels, you'll find it's a very common occurrence for horses to drift the other way before they turn. So what you can do is put 2 markers either side of G, and that is going to stop that happening. When you put cones in places, you put them there and then you take them away. Now, I used to always not put markers because I said, well, there's no point putting markers because then you're just teaching people to go between markers. And then I worked with a very interesting physio in Vancouver, and I was working with people who had had accidents, and she said, you have to make them do things correctly from the beginning. So this goes right back to what I spoke about earlier, which is, do you let them make errors and then correct it, or do you actually do it correctly first? And so this is very preventable. And then you go, now we're going to take the cones away. Can you still stay straight? So the riders, how I like to teach is that the riders actually know when they do something well. So if somebody does it well, then they know, and then they have the internal feeling of doing something correctly. So they're not always waiting for somebody outside giving them feedback, giving them good feedback. Okay, next one. Now, so the 20-meter circle that we tend to teach from the beginning is either from E or B. And so you line them up on one end of the arena, and this is a time when they're going to be in a straight line. So they're actually straight across the arena. And that can be fun in itself, because you tell them they've got to line up and all their knees have to be level with each other. And can they actually do that? So I never line them up on the center line in the middle of the circle, because then they can't see what you're showing them to do. We'll just now, circle points are interesting because some coaches call them tangent points right from the beginning. Other people call them a circle point. Can we go on to the next slide, please? If you're teaching somebody, maybe they have autism, and we actually have a lot of riders with autism and on the spectrum that do so well in Pony Club, because it's all about what they can do and about what they can't do. But when you talk about a circle point, that's really confusing unless you really explain what it is. Because if you think of a circle, where is a point? There isn't, it's a circle. So then you've lost them, and then they fidget and look down, and then you've lost them. So here we've got, and this buying squared paper is really good for grades 6, 5, and 4. You have to use graph paper for the other ones in a big arena, but here in the small arena, that you can actually, they can count the squares, you can see where you are. So the thing is with a circle point, it's a bit like the turn at sea. You don't actually go to the circle point. If you're thinking about, you're actually one stride on the circle point, so half of it's going to be before the center line and half of it's going to be after the center line. So you may wonder why so many people ride the first, it looks as if the first 3/4 of the circle are good, and then the last circle is just way too deep and they hit the track halfway between M and B. And that is because they've gone to the circle point. By the time they've got to it being straight, then it's too late, and then they can't get back to B. So putting 4 cones on one side and 2 on the other, and then in from E and B. So if they're starting the circle at B, when they get to E, they have to be on the track a meter before E. So they're on the track, off the track. And you can do it with, okay, can we do the next one, which is not so good? Right, now the brownie colored one is because the riders think they have to go to level with F and K and H and M. So then it's way too wide, but that's what you see a lot of them, because that's where they think they have to go. Where they actually have to go is, and the other one is just they're not thinking at all, and half the time they never get to E. So if we can just go back to the one before, Sue-Ann. Yeah, here. So I stop them at B, and they have to say where they're going to cross the center line, which is halfway between X and A. So you might want to put a cone on X, which helps them to work out where halfway is. So this would be once you've got past the stage of having all those cones there, because you've got to be able to get rid of cones and have people error-free riding really good circles. Okay, so it's halfway between the center, between A and X and A and C. Okay, we don't like that one. We'll go on to the next one. Now, when you have to teach the 20-meter circles from C, you want to line them up on the far side of the EB line, and then put however many cones X that you want to. And if you're in an arena that isn't enclosed, then you can put your cones outside the arena 4 meters from H and 4 meters from M. Otherwise, if it's in an enclosed area, just put it in from the long side. And you have to explain that you don't ride anywhere near H and M, because that is where the riders will go to. So you've shown them that the circle points are halfway between the corner and B, then X, and then halfway between E and the corner. And telling them where to look, which is they're at least a quarter of a circle ahead. Now, an exercise that I really like, but only once they've got the circle, is they ride a 20-meter square, which means they've got their corners and corners from E and B, and then they ride a circle. So they ride one and then the other. So if you were teaching that, and you could then actually get the riders to do it one at a time, because they've already done it and they need a little bit of a break. And then you can say what you're doing is you're seeing, have they actually learned how to do it? And it doesn't matter how long learning takes. You're only interested in, is the learning correct and is it going to be sustainable? Okay. So here it is. So there you've got your markers. And it's easy because you can teach it from C. If you've got a really big class, you could have them circling on both ends, but then the problem is that you can't see everybody at once. If you had an assistant coach, if you had a coach that you were training and you were a coach, then you could have half of them on one end and half of them on the other end, and one lot goes to the right and the other end goes to the left, and they have to go over X without crashing into each other. So then they actually have to slow the horse down, or they have to make it go faster. So that's quite a fun thing to do as well. But if there's only one of you teaching, then you just want them all on a circle, or you just get half of them stand down one end, half of them do the circle, and then they swap. And it's the same thing with the on and off the track on the long side. They've got to be on the track before the marker. Okay, next one. Yes, so accuracy. So it doesn't really matter what exercise you're doing with transitions, but can they be accurate at a marker, either an upward or downward one, and then can they do it twice running? So I've done a lot of coaching via video, because I've worked a lot with riders from other countries, and I will say to them, can you send a video of 3 transitions running or 3 walk pirouettes running, whatever it is, because sometimes they can be accurate but once, but you really want them to be able to do it twice the same. And yeah, so then can the rider be accurate twice? You could have different paces, trot to halt or whatever. Then now teaching the correct tempo. People's perception, I'm sure that all of you that teach children to go cross country and you watch them go around and they are unbelievably slow, and then they finally finish and they're so excited because they went so fast. So people's perception of how fast they're going, even in a dressage test, is really interesting. And when people get nervous, they tend to go far too fast. So I've been lucky enough to teach different Paralympic teams, and that's one of the things we have to really stress is the correct tempo when they get into the ring and they get nervous. So you get all the riders to, or you can do it in 2 groups, go fast, go too fast, now go to the dressage test pace, and then you do with go slow and then go faster. And what riders love to do is it's a game, and you say trot, and it's the first person that gets into trot. So that could be from a walk, it could be from a halt, And then you do the downward transitions as well. And it's who can do it the quickest. And with the downward transitions, it's always really good because the little ponies that don't really go very forward and they don't go fast, they're usually the ones that win the downward transitions, whereas the more go-y ones tend to win the upward ones. So you've sort of put it into a game, into a competition. Okay. Now, essential rules. To send a child off to learn the rule book is just not on. So possibly they can't even read. They're certainly not going to be able to want to do that. So what you've got to decide is what is really important for somebody to know. And it is when they go, when it's their turn to go, where do they go? Do they have to stand by the judge? It's really interesting. When I came anywhere else in the world, if you go and say hello to the judge, you'd get eliminated. Whereas in Australia, it seems to be that that's the polite thing to do. It's very time consuming, and actually at pony club championships, they tend to not do that, which is good. And I think it's something that shouldn't be done because people have huge numbers on them. And it means that you're teaching the ride not to get ready to start the test. And then they also, anybody from the judging point of view, when a rider comes and the horse peers into the car and you're trying to do the marks from at the bottom of the test, and you're really, your concentration is really disturbed by somebody wandering around outside the car. So whatever the rules are of what's going to be done is you have to teach the riders, but going up, standing for a minute by the car is not a good preparation for your horse going in to do the test. So you just have to work that out, what you're going to teach them to do. How long they have after the bell has rung? Well, they have 45 seconds. So it's a really good idea to practice that, because what tends to happen is that the rider goes up to the judge has finished doing the test before, and as soon as they've turned the corner, or even before they've turned the corner at M or H, the judge has rung the bell, and then the rider panics and tears down the long side. So you actually need to have practice of the time. Excuse me, my cat, stop it. Sorry, I have a cat that's trying to get in the cat door, which I've blocked up so he can't. Good, I think he's gone away. So then they can actually see that 45 seconds is actually quite a long time. They need to know that each movement's marked out of 10, but more important than that is they need to know what to do when they make an error. Any of you that have judged know and dread when the little kids go wrong, because first of all they cry and then they turn around and gallop out of the arena. So you need to explain that they only lose marks. And the other thing is that they also need to know is that if they go wrong and then they complete the test, the judge might be thinking, oh, is that a 6 or a 7? And they'll give them a 7. So you can actually, not that you want to go wrong on purpose, but you don't lose a huge amount of marks. And then you need to explain that the judge will tell them where to start from, because they really have to do the completed movement. So if it was a 20-meter circle at B and they forgot and they went down to A, then they've got to come up to where the movement starts, which could be at C or somewhere. What they do if they're on the incorrect leg, well, it's fine in level 4 because it doesn't matter. Sorry, in level 5. Level 6, they don't canter. But in grade 4, so they've really got to, if they're on the wrong leg, they've got to keep trying to get the correct leg. But if you don't explain that to them beforehand, and by some chance they go on the wrong leg, then they're going to be very upset. Okay. Now we can put the test together. So this is a really easy test that you can have with a class lesson. And here we've got Aria waiting to go in and do a test. So this little test, it doesn't take very long to do. They enter at walk and they're looking, what you're looking at is, do they enter the middle of the entry? At X, they trot. Are they accurate? And do they stay in a straight line? Then they've got their turn at C. Do they stay facing C? And at where do they turn it? Then B, turn right. E, turn left. A, down center line. Before X, walk. And then at X, halt, salute. And as the first horse is halting, the next horse starts. And it takes very little time, but it means somebody's actually completes a test and has to get organized and how are they going to start and get nervous about it. And you can do that in a class lesson and you can do it at the end, and when they've done it, they can get off. And you also have to explain how they leave the arena at the end of the test. Okay, next one. So learning a test. There are all kinds of different ways of doing this, but if you have a little arena for, on a piece, so you have an arena for each movement, and then they can be drawn in different colors, the different paces. Learning a test, you can normally divide it into 3 sections. Sometimes the middle they trot and then they walk and then they canter. So the walk section could be very short. But if you learn it in 3 parts, you do the first section and you know it. And then in the end, you do the first section. And as you're finishing that, the rider can then remember the next section. It can be a real worry for riders when they can't remember where to go. And for combined for pure dressage, you can have a caller except at state level, but for combined training and eventing, they have to remember it. So a nice thing to do is if you have a little whiteboard and the rider, when they're just before they tack up, they actually go through the test and they can draw it with a whiteboard marker. And they actually draw it where they're going to go, or they could have it, they can draw it on a piece of paper. If they get very serious about their dressage, you have your little arena for each movement, under which you have what it says on the test sheet. And then under that, they put 2 points they've got to remember. So if it was A, enter, and then X, halt, then you would say enter middle of entry. And then those are just a couple of little things that when the rider's getting ready, they can just go over it and just refresh their memory. The other thing that's really good is for the rider is to video the rider riding the test, or video somebody else riding the test where they don't make any errors. And they actually say, I am looking here, now I'm getting ready to trot. So then your rider can look at the video when they're getting ready, and that really reminds them of where to go. So these are all things that we do internationally in Para Question, and I think it's a pity that we don't do it in other things like Pony Club, because it really is helpful. Then if a rider can go over with their eyes closed and you pretend that you're riding it, that's also good. Later, you can do that far more, so you actually feel that you're riding the test. But just being able to do it with the eyes closed is good. Okay. Now, people need to learn right from the beginning that when you're warming up for a test is not the time for schooling. All you're doing is getting ready to do the test. So schooling happens at home. You may need to help your riders if you're a coach or if you're a parent, have a timetable for preparing for a dressage test, or then the cross country and everything else when you're going to walk the course. And of course, everything takes far longer. I remember when I was fairly young and we got to a competition, I was in a state because I'd lost my whip. Well, I'd put the whip on the side of the Land Rover and then I couldn't find it. And my mum just disappeared. And I saw her at the end of the day. Well, that was the last time I yelled and shouted before I competed, because I really did need her to help me. But if you have a timetable, then and the timetable is there for everybody in the family to see, then you know what time you've got to get ready and do everything. And that's really helpful to keep the stress levels down for everybody. Then when you warm up, you're not trying to improve the horse. Some riders like to go over the whole test when they're warming up. Is that okay? Well, if it was an advanced test, then it's too long. But for some of the riders, that's how they like to do it. And so I think that's fine. What you're really doing when you're warming up is the horse settled, and is it going at the correct tempo, and is it obedient to the rider? Now, the other thing is that we tend to warm up in a big paddock, whereas the arena is much smaller. So your riders have to ride corners and like short sides with a corner on each side, and the circles of approximately the right size, because otherwise when you go into the arena, the horses are quite confronted by suddenly, instead of doing big turns or no turns at all, they suddenly have to do little ones. And it also gets the rider concentrating on how to ride a corner before they go in. Next one. Now, aims. This is another thing that I think is really important. If you just do a test and you don't have an aim, then you're really directionless. Records are really easy to keep now because you can video tests, and then you can measure improvement. The other thing is that if you don't have records, you make the same mistakes over and over. Some of the riders right from the beginning will want to write things down. They keep records, they keep books of what they did that wasn't so good and what they did that it's mostly things that weren't good. So you want to inspire your riders to enjoy the dressage journey, but please also teach them to jump, because jumping is such fun as well. And I think we just end with these gorgeous riders. So this is what it's all about. Thank you very much. And that's a deer. Chester's just beautiful, isn't he? He's not going to move, so that means that she can have her hand out behind her and her head down. Now, thank you.
Thank you, Mary. That was wonderful. So Mary is happy to answer some questions. I just want to thank you, Mary, for that wonderful presentation. I'm sure everybody has learnt a few extra tips for next time when they get out in the dressage arenas or when they're training at home. And I know the coaches will have got a lot out of that as well. And big thanks to our Pony Club riders who shared their photos with me for the presentation. I hope they got a kick out of seeing themselves there too.
I would like to thank Kathleen, who has been fantastic helping me put this together. It looks a lot better than it did when I handed her the slides. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Sue Ann, are you still there?
Yes.
I am, Kath.
Oh, do you have some questions for Mary?
I do. Very early up, we had, what age would you start teaching inside leg and outside rein?
I think fairly early, because particularly if you do it on a diagonal line, they actually learn about getting the horse's head straight and about using a leg. So I think that happens quite naturally. Then if they're going through a corner and the horse is completely looking out, then is the ideal time to say, well, which leg do you need? The problem is that some of the little ones, their legs don't do very much, and they can sit there flapping with both legs, but not a lot happens. I think a lot depends on what the rider wants. Some of the riders really want to know how to do it correctly right from the beginning, but they don't all. Everybody's so completely different. So is there another?
There is another question. When filming a test to show riders, do you have a suggested location to film?
Yes, if you're doing it for schooling, then you can move around. So you could, if they're practicing the center line, then you can do it from C. One of the things with the circles is, and particularly in the big arena, is the judge from C, all the circles look slightly flattened. So if you're going to be videoing at this level, the circles, then you're better off being level with E or B, if that's where the circles are taking place. And then, yeah, so, but if it's a test, then you have to do it from behind A, because you've got to do it where you're able to be.
Yeah, the rest of that question was, would filming from E or B be more confusing than from A or C, I suppose?
No, it's quite good, and I've seen a lot, because in big competitions you can't always video from where you want, so you actually get somebody in the audience that videos for you, and that's perfectly good for seeing what they're doing.
Another question, do you have any tips for coaches helping before a test when the warm-up isn't going so well?
Yeah, a coffee with a little bit of whiskey in it is really good. Yes, and then, okay, so when it's not going very well, there's not a lot, you can only band-aid then. What you have to do afterwards, but not immediately afterwards, so when your rider has calmed down, then you go, well, what can we do next time so that doesn't happen? And this is where the planning, if you've got a young horse or something, or a horse that's a bit feisty, you might want to do a warm-up earlier on and then get off when the horse is settled, and then you get on 10 minutes or 12 minutes before your test. So it's all about managing the behaviors of the horse. But often it's because there was a flat tire, because they left late. So that's one of the things you can actually help with your parents if you're a coach, is to say, well, what time are you planning? Let's have a look at your timetable, because everything takes so much longer. Then the pony won't go in the float, and you know, all kinds of things happen. So band-aid at the time, and then plan for success next time.
If an individual has a disability and are competing in a pony club horse trials or eventing dressage test, are they allowed to have a caller?
That would depend whether they have an exemption, and the Pony Club has an exemption committee, of which Sally Francis is one of the people on it. Kathleen would be able to answer that question.
Yeah, so clubs would need to apply for an exemption through the state office or through myself, and we go through the Sports Connect program. So there are forms for that on the PCV website, and yeah, any rider with a disability can apply to have a dressage test called, to have a show jumping test or ride called. Yeah, we usually liaise with Sally and work out what the best exemption is for each particular rider. Could also be adaptive equipment as well. But just
Hi, Mary. The new one?
Yes.
Hi, Mary. That was awesome. When I put out cones, the little kids sometimes ride with the cone on the left and sometimes the cone on the right. Is there any clear language you can use if the children don't know left and right?
Put two so they go between. So if you have two of them, and then also you see, do little kids actually know in front of and behind? So if you put a cone on the center line and you say to them, go behind it, they're not necessarily going to go past it. So I think a lot of the people's perception of what we are asking them to do isn't necessarily what we think they're going to do. But so two cones is really good. They just have to go between them.
Emily Warren, any advice for helping riders who may not enjoy dressage to progress within the lessons, particularly game formatted sessions for young kids?
What you've got to have a look at is how long is the lesson? How long are you expecting kids to concentrate for? And if you can, with the dressage, say, okay, well now this afternoon we're going to jump. So when we jump, we have to be able to do corners. We have to be able to go fast and slow. So then you put it into the context of what they're more interested in. And I think they love doing the who can trot first, who can stop first. And I also do a lot of, I have cones on a circle. So I probably have about 6 of them on the circle, and they have to go in and out of them. So that's the other way I teach, is the horse looking. So they've got to make the horses bend from one way to the other, or at the beginning, just is the horse looking in, is it looking out? And then you can turn that into a game where they have to, in the end, they can do it in canter. So they have to canter around the circle first, then they've got to go on an inside the cones, and then they can go in and out of them, and it becomes a game. And that's great for getting kids to canter that don't want to, because peer pressure makes them canter, and then they think it's a fun thing. So I would certainly be looking at how many times you do something. And do you ever ask them what they like to do? So to actually give them a choice, you could say, would you like to do halts on the center line, or would you like to do something else? And they have to put their hand up if they want to do the halts or whatever. So you can actually get them sometimes saying what they want to do.
Sue Nevitt asks, do you explain the use of an open outside rein to help riders keep horses straighter and to help the falling in, and at what age level?
It depends on how is their position. So are they at the stage where they're just trying to stay on, or are at their stage that they want to develop some more skills? So I do all kinds of things with the straightness, like you can actually, you have 2 poles and they have to go between the poles, or you can have 2 lots of poles running, and can they keep the horse straight? So I do much more straight line straightness than on circles. But when it is on the circle, it's all about where the outside rein, you take the outside rein out to where you want the shoulders to be. So if the horse is falling out, the outside rein is close to the neck. If it's falling in, then the outside hand goes out. So I think I do teach that quite early on. And particularly if it can be, they love the game of on the circle with the cones. I remember I used to have camps when I lived in Bunyip, and the little kids, I did a lot with cones on circles, and then the kids would go, but we haven't got cones. And I said, no, because you've outgrown the cones. Now we're going to do something. So they all love doing it. So, and I just think you have to make it fun.
Ronald Beckett asks, can you confirm where that movement from C to circle 20 metres at B is included in first move?
So can you say that again?
Can you confirm where that movement from C to circle 20 metres, 20 M, sorry, is B, at B is included in first move?
I think it, Kathleen, I think it's in one of the new tests where
yes, yep. So Cheryl, that would be in the new test, which will be released shortly.
How do you know when to move up the next grade?
That's very controversial. I don't answer controversial questions. Look, it's so difficult because I think sometimes kids are held back because they're not very good, and yet they really should be up a level because they need to be with their friends. So and then you get kids that don't want to, there's just so much psychological stuff happening in the who's in what grade. Then sometimes they'll get a young horse just because then they don't have to go on up the grades. They can start again and stay in grade 4 forevermore. So, and then other people are held back when they really want to go up and should be going up. So yeah, it's way too controversial for me to answer that.
Bree asks, how can you remember dressage tests for both horses if you have more than one?
Well, if you do the, yeah, so they're going to do 2 tests in a day and they're different ones. If they're going to practice it, then they practice the one that they're going to do first. If they were going to practice it a couple of days before, they would do the one they're going to do first last. And then this, I think, is where having a video of your test so you can have a look at it, that reminds you where to go, and also the whiteboard, and also having the little squares. But I think it's difficult when you don't have a lot of time between the tests. Okay.
I have some more. You ready for some more?
Yes.
How long do you have to warm up before a test, and do they need to apply every event? I think that's the same question. I'll just check. No, sorry, that isn't. Isla says, how long do you have to warm up before a test?
As long as you need. And that totally depends. People tend to warm up way too long. Sometimes you don't know whether your horse is going to behave or not. So you allow time, and then when the horse is ready, because you've only got a small window of opportunity when the horse is going to be at its best, then it just has had it. And I'm sure those of you that judge dressage know, you'll see a horse coming and it shakes its head part way through. It's just tired. It's just had it. It's, as we call it, over the top. So we say there's a window of opportunity where it's at its best, and then it's had it. So that's where keeping a record is really good, because if you worked in for 20 minutes and that was perfect, well, then you need to write down somewhere that 20 minutes was good. Or if you felt you needed another 5 minutes, then you'd put down, next time I want 25 minutes. And that's really, at this level, this is what the parents have got to do. I mean, how much concentrate, you just see them, the ponies just go round and round, and and they've had it before they do the test. And then some parents always arrive late, and the kids have about 1 minute warm up, and the pony does a good test. So there's no answer to that except keep a record of how the horse is and the rider is. Yes.
Alison asks, do you have a favourite jumping pole cavaletti exercise that you like to use to improve dressage skills in this age group?
Yes, you can have a pole at X, and they have to go on the diagonal, and then they go over the pole, and then they've got to go back. So it's like a loop. Either they go over a pole or they go between poles that are just either side of the center line. And also the poles on the diagonal that they go between or over. So I think poles are great. I think they can make a lesson far more interesting.
Sarah asks, how long is a good time for a dressage session?
3 minutes. No. I think for little kids, half an hour is just fine. I think that when they go and they do a whole hour, I mean, when I teach privately, a private lesson is 45 minutes, and a shared lesson with older people is an hour. But I think that with little kids in the pony club, it's just, you just got to go from one thing to the other. So I think half an hour is plenty. It just needs to be focused. And, you know, I hate it when I see the riders go round and round and round and round until the ponies just don't want to go anymore. And then they have to jump, and then the ponies are tired to jump. So I think that the dressage with the little kids that are going to do other things as well, half an hour is great.
Do you have any suggestions where you can get smallish cones from?
Yeah, Aldi's when they're on special.
And the other one would be Kmart.
Yes.
And the sports section.
Yeah.
For
yes.
less than $10, you can get some really good ones.
Yeah. And then it'll be windy and they'll blow away.
You can put a bit of sand on them, Mary, and
yes, yeah,
make them heavy.
Yeah.
You're in the sand.
Yeah. But it's so much easier to, if you're coaching or as a family, if you just have a little set of them, and then they're just so easy to put out. Otherwise, you're lugging horrible old roadside cones that are really heavy and awkward, and yeah.
Megan asks, I have a young autistic boy who just cannot get the correct diagonal on the right rein, sorry. I have tried sit 1 bump, sit 3 bumps, stand 1 bump, stand 1 bump, stand 3 bumps. Any tips?
Yeah, I can't sort of answer that straight away, but I think doing that. So she said that in the end he did it with the counting. I would probably do it off the horse, pretending to go up, down, down, up, down, up. So you just got to do 2 downs. You could practice it sitting on a 44-gallon drum. The problem is with children with autism is that how they do it the first time is how they always do it. It's very hard to change anything. And then you look at, in the big scheme of things, does it actually matter? So you can end up getting so thing about that this person has to learn trotting diagonals, and then you forget to do all kinds of other things with them. So there's no easy answer when you're dealing with people with autism. That's why they're so fascinating, lovely to work with.
Bree was just wanting to know a little bit more about Sports Connect. She's just asking, how long do you need to reapply? I think this is what Bree's asking.
Yeah, so the exemption lasts for 2 years, and then you can reapply.
How do you prepare for a test when you don't have access to an arena?
A lot of people do it on their sitting room floors. They put little markers out, and then the rider practices it on their feet. Or they do it in a car park and they put the markers out. If you haven't got an arena, then you want to make one with bits of sticks, and it's not good to use string because horses can get caught in that. But if you've got poles, all you need is a pole in each corner, so 2 in each corner, and if necessary they could be garden stakes, and then you have your cones that you've bought cheaply, and you just paint on the letters, and there you go. You can put it in a paddock or anywhere else. And you could do it on a bicycle if you did it in a car park. Now I'm trotting, now I'm cantering, to get the shapes. Is there any more?
I think that's all the questions.
Okay, good. I hope I've answered them. So I think we can close then, Kathleen.
Yes, thank you, Mary.
I must say, actually, the only other question was, will the slides be available?
That's up to PCA. I think they probably...
Yeah, you can send me an email to the address that I've put up there to obtain a copy.
Okay.
That might be it, Mary.
I think it is.
Yay. Thank you everyone for coming in. And as mentioned earlier, make sure that you keep an eye in your emails and your social media for our next presentation. And we hope you'll come back and yeah, have a listen in on the next one, especially those grade 4 riders. It'd be great to come in and hear what it's like in the grade 3 and 2 and prepare for the future. Have a good night. Thank you.